Thank you for watching our video. Please subscribe to watch our next video. Thank you for watching our video. Please subscribe to watch our next video.
Thanks for watching. Follow a brighter destiny for more powerful stories, and don't forget to subscribe.
The elevator at Whitmore Capitol Tower had been broken since 6:15 that morning, and Odessa Mayfield had already climbed 9 flights of stairs twice before the sun cleared the rooftops of uptown Charlotte. She was 47 years old, built solid and round through the shoulders and hips, the kind of body that had carried mop buckets and floor buffers for 2 decades without complaint. Her hands were wide and calloused, the nails cut short and practical. She moved through the marble lobby of the tower a little after 7, pushing her cart past the security desk, past the row of gleaming elevator doors, past her own reflection in glass she had polished 1,000 times. Nobody in that lobby looked at her twice. That was the arrangement, unspoken but absolute. The bankers and the brokers and the junior associates in their pressed suits walked past Odessa the way people walk past a fire hydrant or a mailbox, a fixture of the landscape, present but unremarkable. She had made her peace with that arrangement years ago, or told herself she had. 3 medium truths and 1 short one. She cleaned the 31st floor executive suite every morning at 6:47. She emptied the trash on the 22nd floor by 8:15. She wiped down the glass conference room walls on the 40th floor before the partners arrived at 9. She was invisible, and invisible people are everything. Bianca Whitmore Sinclair made sure Odessa never forgot her place. Bianca was 29, blonde, sharp-jawed, the kind of beautiful that had been cultivated by trainers and dermatologists since adolescence. She was the daughter of the tower's namesake, and as of 6 weeks from that Tuesday, she would become the wife of Preston Sinclair, the bank's 34-year-old CEO. Bianca did not walk through the lobby so much as she processed through it, heels striking the marble like small gavels. She had a particular way of looking through Odessa rather than at her, and on the rare occasions she did look at her directly, it was never for anything kind. "Careful where you're standing," Bianca had said once, months earlier, when Odessa's cart had blocked half a hallway for 90 seconds. "This carpet costs more than you'll make all year." She had not raised her voice. She never needed to. Cruelty delivered in a pleasant tone carries its own particular sting, and Bianca had perfected that tone the way some people perfect a golf swing. On that Tuesday morning at 9:22, Bianca crossed the lobby with 3 of her bridesmaids trailing behind her like a small pastel entourage, and Odessa felt the air shift before she even looked up. Bianca was holding a thick cream-colored envelope, sealed with a wax stamp shaped like a monogrammed W. She held it the way a cat holds a bird it has decided not to kill yet. "Odessa," Bianca said, drawing the name out like it amused her, "I have something for you." Odessa straightened, wiping her palms on her uniform. "Ma'am, an invitation." Bianca extended the envelope between 2 manicured fingers, close enough that Odessa had to reach for it, far enough that she had to take a step to close the distance. "Preston and I are getting married at the Ashford estate on the 20th, black tie. And I decided it wouldn't be right to leave you out." One of the bridesmaids made a small sound, half laugh, half cough, quickly swallowed. Odessa looked down at the envelope in her hands. The paper was heavier than anything she'd held in years, the gold foil lettering catching the lobby lights. "We're whatever you'd like," Bianca continued, and here the pleasant tone thinned just enough to show the blade underneath. "Just not the uniform. We wouldn't want the other guests thinking you're staff." The laughter came louder this time, 3 young women trying and failing to keep it behind their teeth. Odessa felt the heat climb up the back of her neck, felt her jaw lock, felt 20 years of swallowed insults rise in her throat all at once. She did not cry, she did not argue, she said 2 words quiet and even. "Thank you." Bianca blinked, caught off guard by the absence of a scene, and for half a second, something like uncertainty crossed her face before she recovered it with a practiced smile and turned away. her heels clicking a retreat that she would later insist to herself was a victory lap. Odessa carried the envelope to the janitorial closet on the mezzanine level and sat down on an overturned bucket because her legs had stopped agreeing to hold her up. She did not open it right away. She already understood, with the particular clarity that comes only from a lifetime of practice, exactly what this was. This was not a kindness. This was a trap built from expensive paper, and she was meant to walk into the Ashford estate in whatever she could scrape together, to stand out among 400 guests in evening wear like a stain on a white tablecloth, to become the story everyone told at brunch the following Sunday. A woman they could point at and laugh at together, as if cruelty shared among friends were somehow lighter than cruelty alone. Forward hook, because the story does not stop there. Bianca had made one mistake in building her trap, and it was the only mistake that mattered. She had assumed that the woman standing in front of her had always been a janitor. She was wrong, and by the end of that Tuesday, 6 weeks before the wedding, 3 separate people would already know it, though Bianca herself would not learn the truth until it was far too late to undo what she'd started. That evening, Odessa climbed the 3 flights to her apartment on Seneca Street, the smell of fried onions from the downstairs unit following her up the stairwell. Her apartment was small and clean and carried the particular quiet of a life lived alone. She set the invitation on her kitchen table and looked at it for a long time before she finally broke the wax seal. Bianca Whitmore Sinclair requests the honor of your presence at her marriage to Preston Alexander Sinclair. Saturday the 20th of June, 5 o'clock in the evening, the Ashford estate. Black tie required. Black tie. Odessa did not own a single garment that could be called formal. She owned 2 pairs of work pants, 4 collared shirts, a winter coat with a broken zipper she'd never gotten around to fixing, and a single navy dress she'd bought for her mother's funeral 11 years earlier. She sat with the invitation in her lap and felt something crack open in her chest that had been sealed shut for a very long time. She was not always a janitor. That was the sentence that kept surfacing over and over in the quiet of that kitchen. She got up, walked to her bedroom closet, and pulled down a shoebox from the top shelf, the cardboard soft with age. Inside were photographs she had not looked at in 6 years. A younger Odessa, 40 pounds lighter but no less proud, standing in front of a ribbon-cutting banner that read Mayfield Community Trust Groundbreaking, 2009. Odessa in a navy blazer shaking hands with the mayor. Odessa at a podium, microphone in hand, 300 folding chairs of families behind her. A newspaper clipping, yellowed at the edges. Local nonprofit helps 1,200 families avoid foreclosure in first 2 years. Her father, Marcus Mayfield, had built a small construction and property management company from nothing and had used every dollar of profit above what the family needed to fund housing assistance programs across Mecklenburg County. Her mother, Ruth, had taught 3rd grade for 31 years and had never once raised her voice at a student, not even the ones who deserved it. Odessa had grown up in a house where dignity was not a slogan but a daily practice, and when her father passed the company to her, she had turned it into something larger than either of them, had imagined a foundation with a staff of 11 and a waiting list 400 families long. Then came the embezzlement. A business partner named Grady Ellison had siphoned nearly $2 million through falsified invoices over 3 years, all while Odessa's signature sat on documents she had trusted him to prepare honestly. When the audit came, when the county pulled its funding, and the newspapers ran headlines with her name in them, nobody waited to hear that she hadn't known. The foundation collapsed in 4 months. Her parents, already frail, did not survive the year that followed her father from a heart attack in March, her mother from what the doctor called complications, but what Odessa privately understood as grief. By the time the criminal investigation cleared her name completely, there was nothing left to clear it for. The house was gone. The company was gone. The only thing that remained was a woman who had learned very quickly that being invisible could feel almost like safety. At the bottom of the shoebox was a folded letter in familiar looping handwriting. Renata Boone Ray, to anyone who'd known her longer than 5 minutes, had been Odessa's roommate at North Carolina A&T, and 20 years later, one of the most sought-after wedding and event stylists on the East Coast, with a studio in Atlanta and a client list that included 2 former NFL wives and a state senator's daughter. Call me. Anytime, I mean it, Des. The letter read, dated 4 years earlier, the ink slightly smudged, where something tears maybe, or just time had touched the page. Odessa picked up her phone. Her thumb hovered over the contact for nearly a full minute before she pressed call. Hello? The voice on the other end was sharp, professional, distracted. Ray, it's Odessa. There was a silence so complete that Odessa wondered if the call had dropped. Then Odessa Mayfield, Lord have mercy. Is this really you? It's me. Odessa's voice cracked on the second word and she let it. I need help, Ray. I think it's time people remembered who I am. Ray arrived the next afternoon in a black Escalade that looked entirely out of place on Seneca Street, wearing sunglasses that covered half her face, and a blazer that fit like it had been built around her shoulders in a factory somewhere in Milan. She took one look at Odessa standing in the doorway and crossed the sidewalk in 4 long strides, wrapping her in a hug that lasted a full 10 seconds longer than either of them expected. Okay, Ray said, pulling back and holding Odessa's face in both hands, studying her the way a sculptor studies raw stone. Tell me everything, and then tell me what you need. They sat at Odessa's kitchen table for 6 hours. Ray opened a sketchbook and a laptop and a small velvet pouch of jewelry she'd apparently packed on instinct before she even understood the assignment. Odessa told her about Bianca, about the envelope, about the laughter in the lobby. Ray's jaw tightened with every sentence, but she didn't interrupt. So, Ray said finally, tapping her pen against the sketchbook, how do you want them to see you when you walk through that door? Odessa looked at the old photograph still sitting on the table herself at the ribbon cutting, 20 pounds lighter, and every bit as round-shouldered and solid as she was now, standing tall in a navy blazer with 300 families behind her. I want them to see the woman they tried to erase, she said, and I want them to understand she never actually left. Ray smiled slowly, the smile of a woman who had just been handed the best assignment of her career. Then we're not dressing you up, Des. We're dressing you as yourself. There's a difference, and by the time I'm done, everybody in that room is going to feel it. For the next 5 weeks, in between double shifts at the tower, Odessa met Ray twice a week at a fitting studio on the outskirts of Charlotte that Ray had rented specifically for the project, paying for it herself, and refusing every time Odessa tried to bring up money. They chose a deep emerald gown in a heavy silk that moved like water, and fit Odessa's full figure the way good tailoring is supposed to, not by hiding her shape but by honoring it, cut to skim rather than squeeze, the color chosen specifically because it made her deep brown skin look, in Ray's exact words, like something lit from the inside. Gold drop earrings. A single gold cuff on her right wrist that had belonged to Odessa's mother, one of the only pieces of jewelry that had survived the collapse of everything else. Ray did her makeup herself the morning of the wedding, refusing to let anyone else touch her old friend's face, and when she was finished, she turned Odessa toward the mirror and said nothing at all. Because nothing needed saying. When you walk into that room, Ray told her, holding both of Odessa's hands, they are not going to see a janitor. They're not going to see a joke. They're going to see exactly what's standing in front of me right now. The morning of June 20th arrived with an almost unreasonable amount of sunshine, the kind of clear Carolina blue sky that seemed engineered for a wedding photographer's portfolio. The Ashford estate sat on 11 acres outside Charlotte, its lawns manicured into geometric perfection, string lights already threaded through the oak trees for the evening reception. By 4:40 in the afternoon, the circular driveway was choked with luxury cars, 2 Bentleys, a Rolls-Royce Cullinan, a line of black SUVs disgorging women in couture gowns and men in tuxedos who moved through the estate like they owned the ground beneath it, because in every practical sense, that day they did. Bianca stood near the garden altar in a gown that had reportedly cost more than most of the catering staff's annual salaries combined, turning for a photographer, adjusting a tiara that had been in the Whitmore family for 3 generations. "This is going to be the wedding people talk about for years," she said to one of her bridesmaids, and she meant it as triumph, not prophecy, though it would turn out to be both. "Do you really think she's going to show up?" the bridesmaid asked, glancing toward the entrance. Bianca laughed, a bright, careless sound. "Please, that woman knows exactly where she stands. She's not coming." "And if she does," Bianca's smile sharpened, "it'll be the best part of my night." At 4:53, a black car pulled quietly through the estate gates and stopped at the edge of the circular drive. The door opened, and the first thing anyone saw was a pair of gold-heeled sandals stepping onto the gravel. Then the emerald silk, catching the late afternoon light as it unfolded, draping over a body that carried itself with a stillness that immediately silenced the 2 nearest conversations. Odessa's hair had been set in soft waves that framed her face. Her mother's gold cuff caught the sun as she smoothed the fabric of her gown and lifted her chin. She did not rush. She did not look for permission. She walked. The murmuring started before she'd crossed half the lawn. Guests turned. Phones lifted halfway before their owners seemed to catch themselves and lower them again, unsure whether they were witnessing something they were allowed to photograph. A waiter froze mid-stride with a tray of champagne flutes balanced on his palm. Somewhere near the altar, the string quartet missed a note and recovered. Bianca turned to see what had stolen her guests' attention, and the color drained from her face by careful, visible degrees. "No," she whispered so quietly that only the bridesmaid beside her heard it. "No, that can't be her." It was 4:58 when Odessa reached the edge of the reception lawn, and the entire garden had gone quiet enough to hear the fountain running somewhere behind the hedges. Bianca forced her mouth into a smile that did not reach anywhere near her eyes. "Well," Bianca said, her voice pitched to Carrie, sweet on the surface and razored underneath. "You actually came, and you certainly dressed up." Odessa let a small silence sit between them before she answered, and when she did, her voice was calm, unhurried, and carried further than Bianca's had. "I did," she said. Her gaze moved deliberately over Bianca's gown, her tiara, the 11 acres of borrowed grandeur around them, and returned, unbothered, to Bianca's face. "And looking at all this, I'd say you dressed up too. Funny thing about money, though. It'll buy you almost anything." She let the pause land, except class. A ripple of sound moved through the nearest guest, someone's sharp inhale, someone else's badly disguised laugh. Bianca's knuckles whitened around her bouquet. Forward hook, because the reveal was only beginning. What none of the 400 guests standing on that lawn knew yet was that among them stood a man who had spent 11 years wondering what had happened to the woman who once put his daughter through nursing school on a scholarship that no longer existed, and in the next 90 seconds, he was about to find out. His name was Walter Ainsley, 71 years old, a retired judge and one of Preston Sinclair's late father's oldest friends. He had been standing near the champagne table when the murmur reached him, and he pushed forward through the crowd, squinting, his hand rising slowly to his mouth as recognition dawned. "Wait," he said, his voice trembling in a way that silenced the small circle around him. "Is that Odessa Mayfield?" The name landed on the lawn like a stone dropped into still water. Bianca's bouquet trembled visibly in her hands. "Mayfield Community Trust," Walter said, louder now, turning to the guests near him as though he needed witnesses to his own memory. "My granddaughter got her nursing scholarship through that foundation, 14 years ago. This woman rebuilt 300 families' lives before." He stopped, looking back at Odessa with something between shame and awe. "Before everything happened, where have you been?" Odessa turned to him with a small, steady smile. "Cleaning floors mostly," she said, "but I never stopped being who I was, Judge Ainsley." I just stopped saying it out loud. The whispers spread through the garden in widening circles. 2 more guests stepped forward before the minister had even reached the altar, a woman named Carol Denton, who explained through tears that Odessa's foundation had covered her family's rent for 8 months after her husband lost his factory job in 2011. and a man named Marcus Odom, no relation, who said flatly that he wouldn't have finished high school without the tutoring program Odessa had built from nothing in a church basement on Beatty's Ford Road. 3 victims of Bianca's cruelty had become, in the space of 4 minutes, 3 witnesses to the very thing Bianca had tried to mock her for lacking dignity, and the record of a life spent giving it to others. Preston Sinclair, who had been checking his phone near the altar and largely ignoring the commotion, finally looked up. His eyes moved from Odessa to his bride, and his expression shifted from confusion to something colder and far more deliberate. "Bianca," he said, low enough that only those closest could hear, though the quiet of the garden carried it further than he intended. "What exactly is this?" Bianca's mouth opened and closed twice before words came. It was just a joke, Preston. A harmless joke. I never thought she'd actually. You invited a woman to our wedding specifically to humiliate her, Preston said, and his voice had lost every trace of the easy warmth he usually performed for cameras. A woman who has apparently done more good for this city than every name on our guest list combined. And you thought that was funny. You don't understand, Bianca said, her voice rising, panic cracking through the polish. She's staff, Preston. She cleans your building. I understand perfectly, Preston said. Odessa stepped forward then, and the lawn quieted again to hear her. There's no need for any of this, she said, her voice even, carrying no triumph, only weight. I didn't come here for revenge. I didn't come to ruin anyone's day. Her eyes moved to Bianca, steady and clear. I came to remind you, and everyone standing on this lawn, that dignity isn't something you can buy at a boutique, and it isn't something you can strip away from someone just because their uniform has your name stitched over the pocket instead of theirs. It's something you carry, whether anyone's watching or not. Nobody clapped at first. Then a single pair of hands started, somewhere near the back, Judge Ainsley's. It turned out later, and the applause spread across the lawn until most of the 400 guests were standing. Some of them wiping their eyes, several of them looking, for the first time that evening, at the caterers and the valets and the string quartet, with something that resembled actual recognition. Bianca did not wait for the applause to end. She turned, dropped her bouquet onto the grass in a scatter of white peonies, and walked quickly toward the house, her heels catching twice in the lawn before she broke into something close to a run. Forward hook. What happened over the next 11 weeks would prove far more permanent than one ruined ceremony, because Bianca Whitmore Sinclair's afternoon of cruelty had been recorded, from 3 separate angles, by guests who had assumed correctly that the world deserved to see it. The video reached 40,000 views by midnight and 2 million by the following Wednesday. Local news picked it up first, then a national morning show, framing the story with the header, Charlotte Bride mocks building's janitor turns out she's a nonprofit legend. Whitmore Capital's board, which had spent 11 years quietly building a reputation for community investment to offset the family's history of aggressive foreclosure practices, convened an emergency session on the Monday following the wedding. By Thursday, Bianca had been formally removed from her advisory seat on the Whitmore Foundation board, a mostly ceremonial position her father had arranged for her, but one that came with a 6-figure annual stipend she had never once earned through actual work. Preston filed for divorce 19 days later, citing irreconcilable differences in language so clinical it barely hinted at the true reason, though most of Charlotte already knew it. More consequential than the social fallout, and considerably slower to arrive, was the reopened investigation. Judge Ainsley, still shaken by what he'd witnessed at the estate, had spent the following weeks quietly pulling old contacts, and in early September, a forensic accountant retained by the county revisited the original embezzlement case that had destroyed Mayfield Community Trust more than a decade earlier. Buried in banking records that had been overlooked in the original 2013 audit was a wire transfer trail connecting Grady Ellison, Odessa's former partner, to a shell account that had funneled a portion of the stolen funds into investments managed, at the time, by a firm owned by none other than Bianca's father. Nothing suggested the elder Whitmore had known the money's origin. The investigation would eventually conclude he hadn't, but the connection must strip away the last of the family's carefully cultivated reputation for civic virtue, and enough, finally, to formally and permanently clear Odessa's name in the public record, something the original court proceedings had done legally, but never undone socially. By the following spring, the culture at Whitmore Capital Tower had visibly shifted. The new interim CEO, appointed after Preston stepped back from daily operations to manage the fallout, instituted a mandatory staff appreciation policy that some employees privately mocked as overcorrection, but that others, particularly the cleaning staff, the security guards, and the mailroom workers who had spent years being walked past without a glance, quietly welcomed. The tower's lobby now displayed, alongside its usual corporate art, a small brass plaque commemorating the founding of the Mayfield Community Trust, re-established that January with seed funding from 11 separate donors, 3 of whom had stood on that lawn in June and watched a woman in an emerald gown remind them what they had forgotten to notice. Odessa did not attend the plaque's unveiling in her old uniform. She wore a simple gray dress, her mother's gold cuff on her wrist, and stood at the podium with the same steadiness she'd carried across the Ashford estate lawn 9 months earlier. Ray stood beside her, arms crossed, the same proud, knowing smile on her face that she'd worn the day the car pulled away from the wedding. So, Ray had asked her that evening in June, leaning against the car door as Odessa looked back one last time at the string lights and the scattered white peonies on the grass. Was it enough? Odessa had taken a long breath, the kind that felt, for the first time in a decade, like it belonged entirely to her. No, she said quietly, it's not enough. This is just the beginning. Ray had laughed and squeezed her hand. Damn right it is, she said. Let's go build something so big nobody in this city ever gets to forget your name again. The car had pulled away from the estate as the sun dropped low over the oak trees, painting the whole sky the color of something being given back. Odessa watched her own reflection in the window glass, not a janitor, not a punchline, not a woman anyone had managed to erase, and understood, with a clarity that felt earned rather than given, that the crown she was wearing had never once come from that estate, or that gown, or that gold cuff on her wrist. It had been hers the entire time. Nobody had given it to her, and nobody ever again was going to take it away. This story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real people, companies, or events is entirely coincidental, and it is shared for the purpose of storytelling and reflection, not to depict any real individual or organization. If stories like this one mean something to you, stories about the dignity nobody can strip away, and the quiet strength of people the world walks past every day, hit that subscribe button and stay close, because there are more of these journeys coming, and we'd love to have you with us. For everyone. Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and educational purposes only. All characters, names, businesses, and events depicted are entirely fictional and do not represent any real person, living or dead, or any actual establishment. Any resemblance to real persons, organizations, or events is purely coincidental. This content is intended to explore themes of human dignity, workplace ethics, and social justice through narrative storytelling. It does not make factual claims about any individual, company, or institution.